Hello and welcome to this provider standardisation training for the T-level in education and childcare. My name is Charmaine Phelps and I'm a provider development officer here at NCFE. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Jo Patton and Kay Armitage, who will be running this session and also taking questions at the end. For now, what I would like to do is start off by just running a quick poll to see how confident you currently feel about standardisation, so marking and standardising the marking of the T-level in education and childcare. So you should see that up on your screen now. And in order to cast your vote, so 10 would be extremely confident and 1 would be not confident at all. And I can see the votes are coming in. There's quite a wide range, which is to be expected. So for those of you who are unsure, you just literally click in the box that you can see in front of you. So 10 for extremely confident and 1 for not confident at all. And we've nearly got 100% of the votes. So I'm just going to leave this open for another 10 seconds and then I will close it off and you'll be able to see the results. So it is a normal distribution that I can see in front of me. So I'm going to close that off and share the results just so you can see. So it's a normal distribution because, as you can see, we've got the highest number, 35% in the 5s and 6s. We've got 6% extremely not confident down at the 1s and 2s, 2% at the 9s and 10s, and then almost equal for the 3s and 4s and 7s and 8s. So hopefully we'll be able to raise everybody's confidence by the end of this session. The way we're running this session, we are going to play a recording of with Kay and Jo. They are here live as well. So all of the questions that you pop into the question box, they will be answered. If they relate to the session as it is going along, then we will answer it as it's going along. If they relate to, more general matters about the standardisation of the T-level, then we will wait until the end and we'll answer all of those questions. So we've got Jo and Kay there. So I'm going to start the recording. And I'm going to press play and I will be pausing when there's time for you to read, and Kay and Jo will be able to guide you on any activities.
Welcome again to the Provider Standardisation Training webinar. The aim of today is to revisit some of the key information related to planning, assessment and moderation, and to clarify the expectations of Assignment 2. We will explore the marking criteria for structural observations and assess part of an observation narrative for early years educator and assisting teaching. This will support assessors to have a standardised approach to assessing and marking the structural observations of Assignment 2. The other agenda items include the Assignment 2 overview, the resources available, planning, EYE Assignment 2 Part 2, AT Assignment 2, and moderation. We hope to have time to answer any questions that you may have. Please do submit your questions throughout this webinar. If in the event we aren't able to answer all of your questions, we'll answer them after the webinar and share the responses with you. Assignment 2. These assessments are designed to test to what extent a student can meet the key skills and underpinning knowledge required to successfully work as an early years educator, practitioner, or as a teaching assistant. The tutor guidance document explains the nature and purpose of the assessments and should be used alongside the student pack. For those completing the EYE occupational specialism, you will also need to refer to the EYE competence criteria. Assignment 2 consists of 2 parts for the EYE occupational specialism only. Assignment 2, Part 1, the Competency Assessment for EYE Occupational Specialism, and Assignment 2, Part 2, Structured Observations. Or for AT, it's Assignment 2. Please be reminded that the AT Occupational Specialism does not include the Assignment 2, Part 1. Both parts of Assignment 2 must be completed, along with all other required assessments, for a student to achieve a technical qualification with the Early Years Educator Occupational Specialism. Assignment 2 is split into Part 1 and Part 2 in order to assess two important aspects of a student's achievement. Part 1 assesses the student's competency against the essential Early Years Educator criteria to ensure they can meet the requirements needed to be included in the ratios specified in the Early Years Foundation Stage Statutory Framework. Part 2 assesses the student's level of attainment against the important skills in the performance outcomes of the technical qualification and contributes, along with assignments 1 and 3, to the student's overall grade. I'm sure that most of you will be quite confident with the resources that we have available on the website. In addition, many of you will have accessed the CPD support available from our curriculum team and the resources and guidance shared by the subject specialist team. Further information and webinar dates can be found on QualHub, and you can refer to the T-Level monthly e-bulletin. The resources shown here are accessible on QualHub. These will support you with planning and implementation of Assignment 2, the moderated assignment. We would like to remind you of the webinars available on QualHub. Our monthly e-bulletin also provides details of ongoing training opportunities. Planning observations, including planning observation for moderation visits. Some of you will have already planned your first moderation visit with your allocated moderator. I would just like to add here that moderators are getting booked up quickly, so if you're a Wave 2 provider and you've not yet booked your first visit, please do so at your earliest opportunity so that we can support you to complete all visits within the assessment window. As a reminder, you will only be allocated a moderator once you've booked your students onto the occupational specialism for the second year. Thank you to all those who have already booked onto the occupational specialism. The schedule of assessment. This will show all of the planned observations and the relevant detail of the cohort for the second year of the programme. Moderators will select their sample using the information provided. This form must be shared with the student prior to the structured observations taking place. All EYE competence criteria will need to be observed. Assessors can make use of the resources available on QualHub, as previously mentioned. EYE Part 2 and AT structured observations should be planned by the provider in agreement with the industry placement and student well in advance. Activities are written to reflect naturally or regularly occurring activities in the setting, and providers should make use of regular provision to accommodate these observations. However, it should be confirmed that the activity will allow the student to cover all the criteria as far as is reasonably possible. Students should lead the activities themselves with no input from the provider's assessor. Students can interact as required with other practitioners based on the requirements of the activity. All planned activities will need to be carried out in line with the settings, policies and procedures at all times. Students should be aware that when they will be observed for their structured observations and what activities they will carry out. Students should only undergo structured observations once they are ready to do so, i.e. once they have gained the appropriate knowledge and skills in the performance outcomes and during the assessment window for Assignment 2. Please refer to the key date schedule for more detail. It would be ideal to familiarise yourself with all of the guidance and support resources available. These will help you and your students to increase confidence and feel prepared for the assessment and moderation process. First observation type we are going to explore is EYE Assignment 2 Part 1. This can be taken at any time during delivery. As it is designed to assess competency, it must be observed on the industry placement. Provider-appointed assessors must carry out the observations. Assessors can begin observations of students whenever they believe the student is ready to show the skills at a level of competency. All EYE competence criteria will need to be observed and achieved by the student. The criteria include skills and knowledge. Please be reminded that assessments must only include observations and professional discussion where this is acceptable. Professional discussions will need to be planned. The student can make reference to work products during the discussion. The competence observation criteria document on QualHub can be used as a portfolio style resource. Assessors can sign off the achieved criteria as soon as they feel that the student is ready to be observed and the criteria is met. Assessors observing students can give formative feedback to students after each observation. For example, if a student achieves a working towards level on a particular criteria, they can be given feedback as to what they will need to demonstrate on a future observation to prove competency. There is no limit to the number of observations the provider chooses to carry out for the student. However, the forms and documentation have been designed to allow the assessor to plan observations so they will be as efficient as possible in evidencing the student's competency. Students must have demonstrated competency in all the criteria before they can be considered for achievement of the occupational specialism and therefore the technical qualification. As mentioned previously, an observation planning form must be completed by each student and shared with the assessor and placement supervisor ahead of any observation. Observations should be planned holistically as good practice. This will enable efficient observation of several criteria. The observation record must be completed holistically by the assessor using the student's planning form as a guide. The professional discussion form should be used to complete a record of the discussion between the assessor and the student in adherence with assessment arrangements for the EYE criteria. Students can be observed as often as required to meet the criteria. The completed example on QualHub provides clear guidance on what should be included in each of the forms required for Part 1. Initial observation planning form should be used as explained earlier. The observation of skills recording form should be used to make a narrative record of each planned observation conducted by the assessor. Each observation form must be numbered for referencing purposes. The observation narrative must be linked to the specific criteria during the observation. The professional discussion form, where relevant and only for specified criteria, professional discussion can be used to confirm a student's understanding. In these instances, this form should be used. It must be numbered with the same number as the observation of skills recording form and be linked to the criteria that the assessor feels have been covered during the discussion. Criteria where professional discussion is allowed as a method of assessor judgment are marked as such in the list of criteria. The future planning form should be used after each observation to confirm the outcome of the observation and plans for any future observations. Criteria, assessor judgment guidance and assessment justification forms can be used to capture an assessment judgment for each criterion with a justification linking back to the relevant evidence on the observation of skills recording forms and any professional discussion form. These forms should be completed to some degree after each observation, for example, to record an initial justification for a particular judgment against a particular criteria, but they should only be completed in full after all observations have been carried out and the provider is ready to submit the student's evidence for final TQ achievement. The final judgment form. This form should be used to confirm a final judgment of the student's competence against the EYE criteria as a whole. There will be a deadline in the final year of each student's T-level qualification for these final marks to be submitted. Assignment 2 is externally moderated. However, the standardisation of practice and process is expected and will continue to support accurate judgment against the EYE criteria and is previously highlighted in slide 3. IQAs will continue to sample the quality of assessment, the accuracy of assessment decisions, and support the development of assessment practice following provider internal quality assurance processes. Moderation. The moderator will visit the placement with the assessor, carrying out the same observation with the assessor and moderate the assessment decisions made by the assessor. The moderator will share feedback with the assessor following assessment. A report capturing the outcome of the visit and any identified action and/or areas for development will be produced. The Introduction to Moderation webinar provides further detail on the moderation process. This is available on QualHub.
EYE Assignment 2 Part 2. Let's remind ourselves of how Assignment 2 Part 2 is assessed. There are 3 structured observations. Structured observation 1, supporting children's learning and development. This activity will assess the student's ability to support children's learning and development, making use of both planned and unplanned opportunities. The structured observation can consist of one of the following activities: a literacy session that requires a student to lead a story time session, a numeracy session that requires the student to support mathematical development, engaging with children during play, for example, role play or outdoor play. Structured observation 2, contributing to an enabling environment. This activity will assess students' ability to contribute to an enabling environment for children, making use of both planned and unplanned opportunities. The structured observation can consist of one of the following activities: creating and supporting children's engagement with an interactive display. So, for example, a wall display or a table display. Developing an area of provision, for example, a role play area, a book corner, or a creative area. Structured observation 3, meeting the individual needs of children. This activity will assess the student's ability to meet the individual needs of children through contributing to their care and well-being. The structured observation can consist of one of the following activities: contributing to care routine, for example, a snack or a meal time, rest and sleep, personal care needs. Alternatively, supporting children through planned transitions. An example of this is within the setting, maybe moving from one age group to another or to and from a particular setting. Assignment 2 is marked by the provider and moderated by NCFE. As part of this standardisation training, we are going to explore structured observation 3 for EYE and structured observation 1 for AT. We will look at 2 examples from early years educator and 2 from assisted teaching. We'll explore the marking criteria and the marks awarded for each example. We'll ask you to consider the mark that you would award. We will not be able to share individual responses, but we would ask that you use your findings as a starting point for standardisation activities to be completed within your team and as part of your ongoing standardisation practice. First of all, we're going to look at EYE Assignment 2, Part 2, Structured Observation 3, Meeting the Individual Needs of Children. This activity will assess the student's ability to meet the individual needs of children through contributing to their care and well-being. We will review the observation record and focus on the following criteria or specific reference. So we're going to look at S2.13, Support Children's Group Learning and Socialisation. Using the narrative captured in the observation record, we'll mark the observation reflecting the marking criteria specific to S2.13. Here you can see the marking criteria for S2.13. Please take time to read the marking criteria and use this to consider how you would assess and mark the observation in the following slide.
Okay, can I just check, please, because we had a question through about the marks.
Yeah.
And in terms of the marks, the question was, when you say marks, do you mean competent or working towards? And my understanding is it's these marks here. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Marks 0 to 4 for this. This is part 2, not part 1.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
And if everybody's had the chance to read the slide, which I believe this slide is also in your handouts, I'm going to continue.
The following observation is captured on the observation of skills recording form. For the purposes of this webinar, we have only included the narrative and the criteria assessed. The assessor will also record the following: the student name, date, structured observation title, and number and name of assessor. Records should be signed and dated. The narrative and criteria achieved can be seen here on the screen. Prior to the start of the observation, the student shares the detailed plan. The plan will clearly show the activity planned, the criteria to be covered, and how this will be met. In addition, any criteria to be covered by professional discussion will be highlighted. Please be reminded that professional discussion can only be planned for those criteria where professional discussion is permitted. Please take a few minutes to read through the observation, considering the criteria that we are focusing on today. You will notice that the narrative provides detail in a succinct way. It is important to remember that the record should tell the story and provide sufficient detail to support the assessment decision.
Hi there, everyone. We're just going to give you 5 minutes now to complete this task. If once you finish, if you could just put either your answer in the box or just say that you've finished in the chat box. Thank you very much.
It looks like some of you, like a very small amount of you, have already given a mark. You've put finished, or some have given a mark. And actually, those of you who have put a mark have actually put the same mark. So that's interesting. I might just leave it just for a little while longer because it doesn't look as if everybody's had the chance. Well, now we are starting to see some discrepancies in the marking. But that's fine. And you may find it handy to have, so the previous slide that we were on with the actual marking bands, that was sent to you by email. It's also in the handout, so you may find it handy to have those open as well as what you can see on the slide. Otherwise, it'd be very difficult to make a judgment. Okay, So I think the majority have now given a mark. So I'm going to, oh, now markings are coming very, very fast. So I'm going to move on.
Let's remind ourselves of the criteria we are assessing here. S2.13, support children's group learning and socialisation. How would you mark this criteria? Looking at the marking criteria, we can see that the observation has been graded as 4 marks. The marks for assignment 2 will contribute to the overall grade for the occupational specialism. This example is of a student working at distinction level. Please be reminded that the final grade boundaries for the occupational specialism will be agreed after the final moderation process. The marking criteria states highly effective skills to facilitate and extend children's engagement in paired and group socialisation opportunities during play and learning. The assessor records some of the dialogue within the activity, which is really useful. The student asks the children lots of questions, which gives the reader the impression that the student is facilitating engagement highly within the group. High level of confidence when modelling social skills and sensitivity in independently encouraging children's positive social skills. As you can see, the student also shows confidence and a knowledge of the children when discussing emotions and is sensitive when encouraging social skills, referring to children's home life and family pets, which again the children share and extend their opportunities to discuss familiar scenarios at home. As you can see, professional discussion is not allowed for this criteria. However, where professional discussion is permitted, records should be as detailed with the justification included in the commentary. Records should include sufficient narrative that justifies the assessment decision and outcome of the structured observation. Digital voice recording is permitted and is an effective way to capture the discussion. On this slide, you can see another example of a record of observation. As a reminder, we are focusing on S2.13, support children's group learning and socialisation. Again, please take a few minutes to read through the observation record and consider how you would mark this criteria and how you would capture the justification.
Okay, so that's nearly everybody has had the chance to give a mark.
Okay, so you should have the marking criteria in front of you now. Hopefully you can all. So from this observation, the mark should have been 2 marks. You can see that the marking criteria will need further exploration and standardisation within your team. So this will help further with applying the marking criteria in context. To support with putting this example into context, so this is an example of a pass grade student. So we were looking at supporting children's group learning and socialisation. And what we found in this observation is that the appropriate and consistent ability to provide opportunities for children that supported paired and group socialisation was seen. So the student was overseeing mealtime with a group of children, ensuring that they were acting appropriately at the table. However, there was no encouragement given for the children to converse with each other, and there was no dialogue recorded in the observation record. The student appropriately models and encourages children's positive social skills and interaction with minimal prompting. So the children were were encouraged to support each other with cutlery, water and cleaning up. And the children were also encouraged to use a fork rather than their hands to eat their lunch. The write-up stated that the student models expectations. There was nothing further in the write-up. And more detail would have been needed and needed to be observed for those higher marks. So as with the other observation, the assessor commentary can be captured holistically or individually for the individual grades. The commentary must include the justification for assessment judgment, including the mark awarded. Okay, so we should be looking at assisting teaching assignment 2 now. So assisting teaching assignment 2 consists of 3 structured observations. Structured observation 1 is supporting the class teacher to engage pupils in planned activities, promoting literacy development. In this activity, the student will be expected to support the development of pupils' literacy in a way that is appropriate to their age and stage. And this could include supporting the class teacher in delivering a whole class literacy lesson, moving between pupils to check for understanding and encouraging them to maintain focus, monitoring their progress and liaising with the teacher as appropriate, working with a group of pupils in a literacy activity, or working with a small group of pupils requiring additional literacy support. For those, for example, those with English as a second language or those needing more targeted support. Structural observation 2 is promote effective, inclusive teaching, learning and assessment opportunities for pupils. During this observation, the student may be working with an individual pupil or a small group of pupils and will follow guidance from the class teacher to deliver targeted interventions that support a specific need or support progress. Then you've got structured observation 3. So this is facilitate educational experiences to support holistic learning and well-being. During this observation, the student will undertake an activity that supports children's emotional well-being through developing their resilience and self-esteem, encouraging them to understand and manage their emotions, behaviour and interpersonal skills, and challenging and testing their abilities. The activity could be with an individual pupil or with a group of pupils. They will encourage esteem and pride through an increased sense of achievement in inclusive, safe learning environments that value the individual contributions of pupils and place their well-being at the centre of educational outcomes. Okay, so the next slide. We're going to do similar as we did with the early years educator examples just now. So we're going to have a look at a specific example. So as with early years educator, assignment 2 for assisting teaching is marked by the provider and moderated by NCFE. Moderators will visit industry placements and will observe the assessment taking place, accompanying the provider's assessor and observing the student carrying out their structured observation. The moderator will make assessment judgments, including the allocation of marks on assignment 2, using the same method as the provider. All records and findings will be documented separately to the provider's assessor to ensure that the 2 sets of findings can be reliably compared. So we're going to break down the requirements of assignment 2, and what we're going to do is explore an example from structured observation 1. So this is support the class teacher to engage pupils in planned activities promoting literacy development. No, it's not, sorry, that's wrong. That's my bad, I've got the wrong slide in front of me. Sorry, we're going to look at S1.8, work closely with teachers to ensure own contribution aligns with teaching. Apologies for that. So we are looking at S1.8. So hopefully you've got that criteria in front of you, and that's going to be on the next slide. Okay, yeah, you've got that in front of you now, that's great. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to have a look at the marking guidance for this criteria, and then we'll do the same as before and have a look at another example of an observation so that we can mark them. If you could just spend a few minutes having a look at the record of observation here on the screen and making your assessment decision and marking based on the assessment criteria and the marking criteria, that would be great. And then if you want to pop your answers into the questions so Charmaine can see when you've come to your decision, and then we can have a chat about this criteria. Thank you.
Some of you are very speedy, but it's possible that you read through when you got emailed them earlier. So some of you have come back with marks, and then others are coming through now. And we've sort of got a majority consensus, but there is certainly some difference in the different marks that people are awarding. So I won't name names, but we've got some 3s, some 4s coming through. So I'll assume that everybody's about ready. And if you'd like to continue, Jo.
Thank you, and that's really interesting to hear that we've got some 3s and 4s coming through. So that's great. So if we move on to the next slide, then what we can see is that we had awarded this at 4 marks against the criteria. So the criteria states that the student should be working highly effectively within the boundaries of their own role in alignment with the teacher's expectations. So we'd seen that this was evident through the positive and highly effective contributions to the lesson that the student made in line with agreed objectives in lesson planning. So in this specific example, there was evidence of the student communicating with the teacher to discuss and amend the plan. And there was feedback afterwards, which was highly effective, and there was detail given on student achievement and development. So that was the 4 marks that was awarded for that observation and that specific criteria. So again, with the other observation records, you can, as an assessor, capture the commentary holistically or individually, but the commentary must include the justification for your assessment decision. So that's always really important. Okay, we're going to move on to the next example. So again, we'll give you a few minutes to have a look through this example, and if you could do the same and mark against S1.8 in the marking criteria, and then we'll have a chat about that one as well. To, if I could ask you to do in your teams when you are standardising these and you've got the records so that you can take them away and have a look at them, is to think about what the differences are as well within the actual record of the observation. So is there anything in how that observation's been captured that's making that difference on the judgment you're making? Is it lacking detail? Could there be more detail, etc.? Because I think that would be useful for you to have a think about as well. Okay, so yeah, if we're ready to go on, if we could go on to the next one with that's it. So we had marked this assessment as a 1 mark for S1.8. So let me just go through our reasoning. So there's evidence of the student working within boundaries of their role by supporting the children. However, what you could see through the observation record was there was ongoing teacher prompt and direction during the lesson. So that's why we'd awarded it that 1 mark. There was nothing documented regarding how the student had gained an understanding of the lesson plan and learning objectives. So the record is actually limited. It might have been potentially that had happened, but that wasn't documented on the observation record. So just basing it on what we're seeing in that record, we were awarding 1 mark. So the observations and criteria explored today are aimed to provide you with a starting point for further standardisation activities within your teams. So hopefully it will help to support you to make accurate assessment decisions and marking judgments. So what we're going to do is obviously you should have copies of these, and there will be further examples going on to Qual Hub. So this will help you to apply a standardised approach to the marking of structured observations when your students complete these assessments. If you're a Wave 1 provider, you could also further standardise some of the structured observations that you carried out and completed last year. That might be a helpful thing to do as part of your team as well. So moderators will apply the same judgment to observations completed as part of the moderation process. Okay, and then if we can go on to the next slide. Great, so this is just sort of finalising the moderation process for assignment 2. So assignment 2 is marked by the provider and moderated by NCFE. It's moderated, assignment 2 part 1 is moderated by NCFE to ensure the provider appointed assessor judgments are in line with the NCFE visiting assessor for all criteria. Assignment 2 part 1 is moderated on a continuous basis. NCFE visiting assessors will attend a sample of observations carried out by the provider appointed assessor. So they will observe students alongside the provider appointed assessor and will confirm whether they agree with the assessor's judgments. Where there is agreement across the criteria, the provider continues to assess for EYE part 1. And if there are any disagreements, or if we're not in full agreement, the moderator can provide feedback and flag relevant criteria for a further check, and potentially a further moderation visit would then be required. Agreement must be reached across all EYE Part 1 criteria before the provider is signed off to submit their overall outcomes for Assignment 2 Part 1 for that cohort. So the window for moderation for EYE Part 1 is September to the end of January, and it is important to remember that moderators will need to moderate the assessment decisions of all assessors. So we do need to moderate across your staff of assessors. What I will also just remind you all is that if you haven't put your information onto the portal yet of which occupational specialism your students are doing, if this could be done ASAP, that will then ensure that you are allocated a moderator, and that the moderation for Assignment 2 Part 1 can get started as quickly as possible. For Part 2 EYE and for Assignment 2 for assisting teaching, moderators will attend a sample of structured observations carried out by the provider appointed assessors during the assessment window, which is the 1st of February till 26th of May, sorry, 23. The observations the moderators attend will be selected by NCFE based on the provider's schedule of assessment and in line with the assessment strategy. We will select structural observations to moderate to ensure that criteria worth at least 40% of the overall mark of Assignment 2 is covered for each student in the sample. So this usually means that for each student selected within the sample, 2 of their 3 structural observations will be moderated. We'll also ensure that we moderate across all 3 structured observations. We will observe students alongside the provider appointed assessor. So the assessor will mark the student and the moderator will also mark the student, but the marks for Part 2 or Assignment 2 for assisting teaching will not be compared and outcomes will be captured independently. So we will not provide feedback on the outcome of the observation during the assessment window. However, we will review records of completed observations to ensure that sufficient detail is being captured. Assessors will be required to submit samples for all students across the 3 structured observations. So towards the end of the assessment window, so towards the end of May, we will be selecting further samples of the cohort. So for ease of sharing, it's recommended that you electronically store these files, your records, your observation records, so that they can be shared with us around about the end of May. Once the final marks have been entered onto the portal for all students across all structural observations, final moderation will then take place. Provider marks are compared with the moderator marks, and there are then 3 potential outcomes for this activity. So in order to see the outcomes, if you could refer to the moderation sampling strategy, which is on it's on page 4 of the moderation sampling strategy. So we'd ask that you all have a good read of that and have a look at those 3 different outcomes and how final moderation takes place. Final moderation takes place between May and June, and the occupational specialism grade is confirmed in August. As a reminder, your Assignment 2 is moderated externally by NCFE moderators. So in terms of IQA, the IQA will not sort of specifically sign off assignments, but it is really important that your internal quality assurance processes still take place, and including regular standardisation, in order to ensure that the marks are being standardised alongside the process. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to hand over to Kay now. I'm aware I'm losing my voice slightly, so I do apologise.
Hi there. So are we on questions? Well done, Jo, for that. I managed to escape that really well. I'm not sure how.
Thank you. So I'll read out the questions that
Thank
we've
you,
got.
Shani.
So, can you observe before they go into the second year if you know they'll be doing the early years pathway?
Observations can start as soon as you want, but that's not to say that we wouldn't want to come out and moderate that observation at a later date. So some providers do go out and observe in year one, which is absolutely fine because we're coming out to look at the competencies then after all. So you can observe them as many times as you want to, but we might want to come out and observe that student.
Okay,
Have you anything to add with that, Jo? Or
No,
okay.
Yep, everything.
Is that all right?
And I've got a question. I think you may have answered this, but what is being moderated between September 22 and January 23?
I'll take that again then, Jo. I think you've done lots of the legwork today. So part 1, assignment 2, we moderate between September and the end of January. And then we move on to part 2 in February until the end of May. However, you can still, the centres can still assess for part 1 within the moderation window for part 2, but we will still want to see part 1 within that moderation window.
Okay.
Have I just confused everybody there, or does that make sense? If you haven't finished the assessments for part 1, they can continue. We won't need to see any marks for that until the end of May, so they can continue. However, we will moderate between those specific windows, September to January for part 1 and February to May for part 2.
Okay, thank you. I have got a question from a centre that's not currently doing T-levels yet. So they're not currently doing T-levels yet. Do the students still have to work in each age group for early years? So this is just more of a query.
So what we would say is that it's good to get a broad knowledge of the different age ranges. So up to 4 really, we wouldn't want to come out to do any moderation after kind of foundation stage, because obviously it's the EYFS and the EYE that we're doing here. If students can get more than 1 placement, that's really useful for their own development. However, we are aware that placements are difficult to come by. So as long as the students are working with children 0 to 4, that's what we stipulate. Okay,
so there's no sort of stipulation that says that they have to have had a placement with like say the very, very young, like as in the earlier than up to 18 months,
no.
say, and then also 18 months to say 2.5.
No, like I say, it would be an advantage for that to happen. Obviously, it gives the student a broader range of knowledge, but the qualification itself doesn't actually specify that.
Okay. I've got a question there, but I think it's hard for me to answer. If you can you actually, I'm going to read the question. Is it only the assessor who needs to do this or all staff? If you wrote that question, please can you clarify on what exactly you mean? Because you may have applied that to what was being said at the time, and I'm actually not quite sure in terms of only the assessor. So if you can clarify. There's a question about, is there a tutorial on how to use the portal from the assessor side of things? I know that on YouTube we've got a portal playlist. Is there anything specific related to T-levels, do you know? For
the portal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a guide, the portal guide, which is on Qual Hub. And there's also a webinar that Jackie Vincent, and I'm not sure which other member of staff, I think it was Kelly Graham, put a webinar together. We can send details out of that within the next e-bulletin if that's helpful for everybody.
Yeah, because they did the administration training webinar, didn't they?
That's right, yes.
Okay. I'm just seeing if there's more questions. So, okay, this question. You've shown the way marks are given for structured observations, but are the competency skills marked either competent or working towards because they have to meet all criteria?
So I'm going to answer this for part one, which I'm sure that's what it's aimed at. So for part one, we have to see all 41 of the criteria. And that is why I've said if you want to go out and start assessing in year one, that's fine, because what it is competency, and we like to see over time that the students made an improvement, and obviously the assessors will be able to see that improvement as well. So it might be the first few assessments that you do, the student doesn't meet the competency that we expect. However, over a period of time and a period of observations and professional discussions, we hope that that student will meet competency by the end of the assessment window.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just add to that as well?
Yep.
If the question is in relation to the structured observations, because there are some EYE competency criteria embedded into the structured observations. So if it's in relation to that, then for the structured observations, so for part 2 of the early years educator, there is marking guidance for those criteria as well. So they're still marked with the 0 to 4 marks, and that's all in the tutor guide, the marking guidance that's available.
Okay, thank you. And I've got, is there an overview of how many learners the moderator attends with in person? Need to email moderator to check, but thought would ask here. We only have a small cohort. I know numbers are different depending on class side. Not seeing it written down anywhere that I can remember.
Do you have that to hand, Jo, or shall I have it? So it's in the sampling strategy, all the amounts of students per cohort. We do have a sampling strategy.
Sorry, Kim, I'm talking over you. I think if it's up to 11 students, or 5 to 11 students, 6 to 11 students, we would observe 6. Anything less than that, we observe the full cohort if it's a small group. And no, is that right?
Yeah, so for the structured obs, that's how we do it. 6 to 10 students, we would select 5 for the first sample.
Yeah.
11 to 15 students, we would select 6, and any number above that. So right up to 200 students for the first samples, we would select 6 students, and then it goes up every sample. So we might do a second and we might do a third sample, but we won't talk about that today because we're hoping that we're not going to get to that stage. And for part 1, we just select a sample of students just from the range of ranking that's put on the portal. And there's no number to that. We might come out and see 2 students, we might come out and see 4 students. That all just depends how many criteria are met per visit.
Okay, thank you. Then we've got, can you confirm when professional discussions take place for AT assignment 2? Is this part of the observation?
Yeah, I can confirm that is, yep. So it needs to take place alongside the observation, preferably after the observation of the planned activity. So the professional discussion needs to happen at the same time. And the assessments are set with a guide of an hour to complete, an hour's worth of time to complete. So you want to be able to complete both the observation of the planned activity and the professional discussion within around about an hour.
Okay, thank you. When we're marking assignment 2, part 2, where do we record the mark or justification?
So again, within QualHub, you've got quite a lot of documents, and I think Joe's just mentioned it on one of the slides as well, that you have a justification and a marking scheme. So you can do it on there. Some assessors do the marking as they go along once they've looked at the marking criteria. To be honest, as long as you're happy with how that is recorded and you can get that score onto the portal, it really is up to you how you do that recording, as long as it's transparent and it's valid, and yeah, it's just however you want to track that information.
Okay, thank you. I think you've answered this question before, but I'll just ask it. Will all EYE competency criteria need to be moderated?
Yes, it does. Not per student, but per cohort. Yes, it does.
Okay. When we're signed off for part 1, when are these criteria moderated again? The next year or when we have a new assessor?
So I'm just having a think about this. Come on, Joe, do you want to take that?
I'm just question again.
Yes, please.
Okay. When we're signed off for part 1, when are these criteria moderated again? Is it the next year or when we have a new assessor?
So the part 1 criteria is moderated in some form every year. But certainly if you had a new assessor, we would take that into account. So we would probably look at that new assessor first. What we would do is we would do our own form of risk assessment. So we would look at, if we'd seen you this year, we might vary our moderation for the following year depending on the level of risk. So if you've got no new assessors, we may perhaps choose to do more remote moderation, but we would discuss that with you individually as providers.
Okay, thank you. Would we observe a meal time and it be moderated in, for example, a baby room and then in a 3 to 5 room?
So you just do one or the other. We wouldn't need to see both. Okay. It's just one activity that would cover that care routines for the structured observations. It wouldn't have to be seen for different age ranges.
Okay, thank you. Can they do early years in reception class?
Reception class is fine, but that would be it. Not year 1, nothing above reception.
Okay. We have learners in reception class age 4/5, which still covers EYFS, if that's okay. You've just answered that, really. I think
yes, that's
most
absolutely
are in
fine.
nurseries and most complete assessment with preschoolers.
Yeah, I'm aware that that happened last year as well, and yeah, that meets the specification. That's no problem.
The question that was asked before was, I meant this, so the standardisation, is it only the assessor who needs to do the standardisation, or is it all staff who teach but don't necessarily assess?
I'd say yes. If you're working as a team on the T level, then everybody within the T level team would need to standardise together, yes.
Okay. Is there a template with all of the EYE and skills criteria that we have to sign off?
Again, there's a document on QualHub. And again, assessors do it completely differently. So as long as it's transparent and we can read it and we can see where your justification is at, we don't have a specific document that we'd need. If you want to use all of NCFE's documentation, there's lots on QualHub. However, if you're comfortable using your own, then do so, that's fine. Did I answer the question then? I'm not even sure I did.
Yes, no, I think you have, and I think all of that type of thing will be covered in the admin training. And it's possible that if there's people that are on this training who didn't attend the admin training, I should be able to get the recording and the slides for that and send it out to anybody. So I'll send the slides and the recording from this session, And if you do need the admin training or need signposting to it, then please reply to my email and I'll be able to send those out to you. So I've still got just a few more questions. If we have a new assessor midway through the year, will that require extra moderation in the student's placement?
So we would definitely need to see that new assessor. That's not to say we'd go back to part 1 if we were already in part 2, but that would go on a document, and we might need to set some action plans within our reports depending on whether that assessor has knowledge of the T level or how long they've been assessing for. But no, we wouldn't have to duplicate anything, but we might have to maybe put some action plan in place for that new assessor. Would you like to add anything there, Jo?
No, I think you've covered it. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you.
Okay, this question is, are there no opportunities for unplanned discussions that might happen during feedback?
We love unplanned discussions. Yeah, I think that absolutely captures the observation and the assessment really well. So we like to see unplanned opportunities to develop discussion. We also like to see that there are some professional discussion questions already planned for. But say, for example, that observation didn't go quite to plan, because obviously with young children it very rarely does, then yes, we would definitely like to see a development from the observation as part of a discussion.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add to that as well, sorry.
Yes, go for it.
With regards to the professional discussion, if in terms of moderation, if they are recorded using the digital recording method, then that really allows us to, if we're moderating remotely, see how that professional discussion has taken place, and we can kind of see how that might have gone off in a different direction because the student's reflecting on something that did or didn't happen. So it's really helpful if they are recorded.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a very long question, so I'm going to read it in full. So for EYE Part 1, when a student's met all the competencies, is there any paperwork required for completion to prove this, or just ticking the box to confirm they've met the competencies on the NCFE portal? You mentioned about the assessment justification form and criteria assessment judgment guidance. Where on QualHub can this be found, please? I'm struggling to find all the documents you're referring to. Sorry, now that I've read all that question, I think we'll refer you to the admin training, and perhaps actually it might be easier for me to speak with Jo and Kay, find those documents and pop it in the email that I send out, if that's okay. But you'll be forgiven for having any difficulties with QualHub at the moment, because things have changed. A lot of things are now on the NCFE website in terms of the assessment support. So I think the best thing for us to do is to pop the links into the email, if that's okay.
I'll second that. Thank you very much.
Oh, this is a lovely question. Are there networking groups of assessors to share good practice? There's certainly a best practice network for the T-level providers, because Sarah is actually currently doing it at this moment. Is that what you mean? I'm guessing. Is there anything else that you know of, Jo or Kay?
Not offhand, no. I know that a few of my assessors from the Wave 1 providers are in touch with each other, but I'm not sure that's a platform that NCFE provide.
Yeah, because I think the best practice network that Sarah's running at the moment, it might be for it might be for Wave 1 or Wave 2, or I'm not quite sure what wave we're currently in. But that's
I'll write that down and I'll try and find out, because that's a very good question.
Okay.
So,
another question: do T-level students need to have a certain amount of industry placement hours with babies, toddlers, and preschool ages? So that's similar to a previous question.
Again, we don't actually specify. I've got that correct, haven't I, Jo? We don't actually specify a particular age range.
Yeah, that's correct.
But we would ask for 750 hours across the 2-year course within placement. That's an off IFATE requirement, and that needs to be tracked, signed and monitored.
Okay. With the marking criteria, and I'm assuming it means from like the band of 1 mark or 2 marks or 3 marks or 4 marks, does it represent a pass merit distinction?
That's a really good question. Overall, it does. However, we couldn't say just per criteria how that works. We still need to kind of, so because it's assignment 1 and 2 and 3, it's a combined mark. So just from assignment 2, we wouldn't be able to distinguish where that student would ultimately be, if that makes sense, because it's not just a one assessment that would overall give that mark.
And I think that leads on to the next question, actually. Can a student pass the course if they do not achieve assignment 2? I know it's worth 50% of the grade for year 2, but does the balance ensure that they must pass assignment 2 to pass overall?
That's a really good question, and I'm wanting to say yes. I think they do have to have done the structured observations to pass the course overall, because that's where the competency lies, that's where the proof of the actual placement and yeah, where we want to see the student develop. Do you know anything from that, Jo? I think it is the case that assignment 2 has to be passed, doesn't it?
I'm just trying to have a look in the qualification specification, because I believe it's in there, but I think yes, it does. But what I do know that could happen, for example, is a student could perform at pass or above level in perhaps 2 of the structured observations, but not in 1 of them, but they would still get the overall mark, because the marks are pulled together for all 3 structured observations in order to pass. So I believe, yes, they do need to pass it overall, but they could potentially perform better in some of those structured observations than others and still pass.
Thank you. Do you know where that information would be for providers, or it's not the sampling strategy, is it?
In the qualification in the overall qualification specification, which is on Qual Hub, but I'd need to have a look through it. So maybe we could provide that in our email. I think it's probably the best thing to do.
Yeah. So we'll make sure that everybody gets that information about that.
Okay. I'm still going through the questions just to let you know as well, if we don't get time to answer all of the questions, we will follow up afterwards in email. And in fact, some of the questions are very good and might require, we can easily put together a document that answers all of those questions for everybody. Next question is, can I just make sure that the SOs, is that the observations? Structured observations. Can I just make sure that structured observations can also account for EYE criteria that students may not have achieved prior to their structured observations taking place?
I don't understand that question. Would you mind just repeating that again for me,
Yeah, I think I understand the question in terms of, so I'll read it as it is. So can I make sure that the structured observations can also account for EYE criteria that students may not have achieved prior to their structured observations taking place?
Yeah, I understand that question, and yes, they can. So I think what that assessor is asking is if they've got some gaps in their EYE competency for part 1, can they cross-reference the structured observation to cover some of those gaps? And the answer is yes, if they need to, they can.
Okay. And there's this question, I'm just slightly a little bit confused here, but in terms of the sampling, the question is that 5 learners out of a cohort for all 3 observations, so 15 moderator visits, and the same person has asked, I had 2 students last year, so my moderator came to all 6 observations.
Yeah, that's correct. So we would see a student and we would see those twice.
Okay.
So we'd see a rank order of students and we'd see a selection of structured observations across the sample.
Okay, and they're asking, does that make it 15 moderator visits?
Depends how the assessors plan the structured observations. So going from last year, again, I'm not sure how assessors going to do this year, but I went out and I saw some structured observation 1, some 2s and some 3s, and I might have seen 2 structured observations in a day.
Okay.
So I could see 2 in one day and then go back and see a structured observation the day after or the week after for another student. But yeah, we need to see 5 or 6 students depending on the size of the cohort times 2 observations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we'd visit 15 times. We might come and try and do 2 observations per visit.
Okay. Can you timetable a follow-up professional discussion without a scheduled observation?
A follow-up professional discussion without an observation. So does that mean, go on, Jo, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if that's in relation to EYE Part 1. If it is in relation to EYE Part 1 competency, then yes, you could. So for example, you could do an observation and then say, right, we'll have a further professional discussion to cover some of the competency criteria the following week, for example. For the structured observations, no, this can't be done. So the professional discussion needs to take place at the same time as the observation, as it is a set assessment that needs to happen together.
Okay. Does the assessor have to have an assessor qualification?
I would say yes to this, but I'm not sure whether that's a T-level requirement or not. And I've been asked this question before from one of my centres, and I think I did say yes to this, but I'm not sure whether that's actually specified. Do you know the answer to that, Jo, or would we need to research that further?
It is down to the awarding body requirement. So NCFE with other qualifications don't necessarily require you to have an assessor qualification. It would be down to the provider to make a judgment on whether that assessor is competent to assess. But yeah, I think we need to just actually double check for the T-level what the requirement is and put that in our email out to you just to clarify that.
Without the assessor award, I think it's quite a big ask for an assessor. They've got a huge job with the T-level.
Okay. I think there's a kind of, well, this question I think was, you know, in terms of the admin pro formas and templates that we have on QualHub. So the question saying, are you saying there are no standards to record evidence on? I think what it means is, like, we have our templates and they can choose to record evidence there, but they don't necessarily have to. There's not a, you know, you must use this template. We have the templates, but can they choose other ways? Am I right in my understanding there?
Jo, do you want to take this? Because I answered that. I think I answered that question earlier.
Yeah, that's correct. So there are templates, there are NCFE templates on QualHub. Personally, they're recommended because they've been provided specifically to meet the T-level requirements. However, we do have providers that prefer to use their own templates, and that's absolutely fine as well.
Okay. So I hope that's made it clear. Do we need to write a criteria justification for all learners in order to be ready for assignment 2, or is the feedback from the observation and professional discussions enough?
Personally, I like to see a justification just so that I can see exactly where there might be any gaps in learning. Again, it's how the assessor records information, and as long as that information is recorded and we can see that the student has met the competencies that are required, again, I don't think there's a specific need for a justification for part 1. We like to see that definitely for part 2. What's your thoughts on that one, Jo?
Yeah, I would agree. And what I would also say is, for those of you that have got early years educator, occupational specialism, the benefit of that is that when we do our moderation visits for part 1, we can talk to you and have a look at some of your records and give you guidance on that in terms of what we need to see for part 2 for the structural observations as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there's probably time for just one more question. I am going to, there is a comment to feed on about the portal. Thank you for that one. I'll definitely pass that one on. So we'll just take this final question, and then the other questions that we haven't answered, we'll go through all of them in turn and follow that up by email. So did you say that the professional discussion can be arranged separately to the observations?
Yes, that's correct. So for some of the Wave 2 providers especially, some professional discussions can be done remotely. So we might start by doing some professional discussions and then come out to the actual setting to do some of the observations as well. It depends. That's part of our assessment strategy. We can use that. It's part of how we do the risk-based approach. And we just decide whether we're going to come out first and do a visit which consists of an observation and a professional discussion, or sometimes we can start doing the moderation process with a professional discussion initially.
Okay.
On that's only for part 1. So the professional discussions for part 2 need to take place at the same time as the observation.
Okay. And I will just, I'm gonna let you finish off, so I'm going to move on to the final slide and let Kay.
Yep, so just want to say thank you for everybody for joining today. I hope it's been useful. Any questions at all, send those through in the chat. I think that's going to be kept open for a while, and we'll distribute those questions out to the appropriate people. The questions that you've asked, we will get back to you with the answers for those, but thank you everybody for all your questions, and I hope we've been helpful to you today. Thank you very much.